The UN comes to the same conclusion as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. The international organisation finds that Chilean security forces have used excessive force in their handling of recent anti-government protests. The sardines swim from their birthplace in northern Italy and pack the streets of Rome. Tens of thousands take their protest against xenophobia, populist politics and the far-right League Party to the capital. And Boris heads to the north of England after his big election win. The British Prime Minister thanks traditional Labour voters for switching from red to blue. But even further north in Scotland, the idea of a second independence referendum is gaining momentum. Those are the headlines. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Thomas Waterhouse. There are reasonable grounds to believe that a high number of serious human rights violations have been committed by Chilean police. That's the verdict from the UN's Human Rights Office, which has accused security forces of being too heavy-handed in their crackdown on protesters there in recent weeks. Caris Garland has more.
Torture, severe beatings and sexual violence. It's just the beginning of a list of human rights violations the United Nations accuses Chile's police and army of committing. Prompted by an outbreak in protests, the UN travelled to Chile between October 30 and November 22 and on Friday revealed damning details of the investigation.
We found that police agents are the perpetrators in the majority of human rights violations reported during the context of the protests. Serious human rights violations, including killings and unlawful deaths and torture, were committed also by military personnel.
The recent unrest left 26 people dead and almost 5,000 injured. The UN condemned the use of weapons such as anti-riot shotguns and tear gas canisters, which have left about 350 people with severe eye injuries. Chile says it regrets the allegations, all of which are either being or will be investigated.
We reiterate our willingness to accept anything aimed at improving practices in the area of human rights, their protection being a crucial priority for the state and our government.
The UN said most protesters were peaceful, but there were numerous attacks against security forces and their premises, as well as looting and destruction of private and public property.
Now, staying with Chile, one particular flash mob, which was born there last month, has now spread right around the globe. This choreography against sexual violence, titled "The Rapist Is You," has seen women across the world dance wearing a black blindfold and a scarf in support of this movement. Now, on Saturday, dozens of women in Tunisia performed the routine in front of the seat of government in the capital. The demonstrators who took part in the North African version were responding to a call put out by the local feminist group Falgatna. Let's take a listen to what some of them have been saying.
We're here to denounce violence against women and against every person identifying as a woman. Social violence, institutional violence, domestic violence, all forms of violence.
I think today it's about our collective rage, but also our collective joy at being together and saying together that this has got to stop, that we have to work together and organise ourselves.
Next, we've filled the piazza. Mission accomplished. That's what the founder of the Sardine protest movement has said, as tens of thousands of his supporters packed into a central square in Rome this Saturday for the group's first national rally. The Sardines say they have no intention to become a political party, but they are nevertheless eager to voice their anger at populist politics and xenophobic sentiments. Selina Sykes brings you more in this next report.
The Sardines movement may only be a month old, but it has quickly become a symbol of protest. Tens of thousands of people gathered in San Giovanni Square in Rome on Saturday in a bid to change the political tide in Italy and reject growing nationalism, fronted by far-right leader Matteo Salvini.
I'm here to say no to Salvini and the League's toxic rhetoric and policies.
We need to say that we belong to the human race, and we need to rediscover those values.
Born out of a late-night text message, the Sardine movement was founded by 4 young activists, aiming to outdo a local rally by Salvini in Bologna. A crowd of 15,000 people turned out. The movement's popularity has since spread, with rallies being held in other cities across the country to denounce the hatred and division supporters say are being cultivated by the far right.
We want an end to toxic rhetoric in politics in all its forms. Our laws should not aim to generate fear, but to build an inclusive society which sees diversity as an asset and not as a threat.
Salvini's Northern League party fell from grace back in August when his coalition partner left him in the cold. He's now hoping to make a comeback in January's regional elections and has dismissed the Sardines' protests. While the movement is yet to have set a clear path for the future, recent polls have indicated that 40% of Italians deem the protest to be Salvini's biggest threat.
Staying with Europe, after winning the biggest parliamentary majority since the Thatcher era, the head of the British Conservative Party has wasted no time in thanking voters. Prime Minister Boris Johnson chose to visit the town of Sedgefield in the northeastern county of Durham this Saturday. This is a community with huge symbolic significance because this was the constituency of Tony Blair, Labour's most successful politician of recent decades. Johnson told voters there that he would repay them for their trust and would get Brexit done. But in Scotland, where the Nationalist Party scored best on Thursday, calls for a second vote on independence are now growing louder, as Monty Francis explains.
In Scotland, front-page headlines tell the story. A victory for Boris Johnson and his promise to get Brexit done, but also a mandate for a second chance at Scottish independence.
That's a Scottish referendum is absolutely inevitable, and I think there's a high chance that this time Scottish people will vote for independence.
But not all Scots agree.
I think it's frightening because I think we really need to be educated 100% before making that decision. I think the situation with Brexit was that the people weren't educated.
In a sweeping victory, the Scottish National Party won 48 of 56 seats in Scotland in Thursday's election, a party that supports Scotland remaining in the European Union and that campaigned on a promise to seek a second referendum on Scottish independence. Legally, such a vote would require the approval of the Prime Minister, and political analyst Mark Diffley says First Minister Nicola Sturgeon is unlikely to move forward with a vote without permission, as Catalonia did with Spain in 2017. But he says the election results strengthen the SNP's political position.
It allows the First Minister to go to the Prime Minister and say, look, we have 48 out of 59 seats. We are by far the biggest party. Therefore, the will of the people, this will be her argument, is that we need to have another referendum.
In 2014, Scottish voters rejected independence by a 10-point margin. Sturgeon said Friday Johnson has no right to block a second referendum and that she would detail her case for Westminster in the coming days.
And finally, a Saturday before Christmas is usually a busy shopping day. But here in France, the tills haven't been ringing as loud as they normally would. On day 10 of a huge public sector strike, much of the transport system has been paralysed once again. 3/4 of high-speed trains weren't running nationwide, and 9 metro lines here in the capital, Paris, remain shut. And with fears growing that the walkout will now roll on through the festive season, the managing director of the national rail operator, the SNCF, says half of passengers will have a train home for Christmas time. And that brings you up to date this hour. Do stay with us here on France 24.